After a lifetime of backbreaking work at the docks, Elias Kane thought his retirement would bring peace. Instead, his own son Victor and daughter-in-law Marissa saw him as nothing more than a burden and demanded he take a job as a janitor. What they never imagined was that Elias had been hiding a powerful secret, one that would shatter their arrogance and change their lives forever. When betrayal turned into humiliation, Elias carefully set a plan in motion that exposed lies, uncovered crimes, and revealed a shocking truth about who really held the power in their family. This is a story of sacrifice, repaid with cruelty and justice, delivered in the most unexpected way. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now let us step into the beginning of Elias's final lesson to his son. Elias Kane had always pictured retirement as a long-awaited season of peace. For over 4 decades he had labored at the docks, his back bending under crates of iron and timber, his hands hardened by years of rope burns and splinters. He had watched ships rise like mountains against the gray skyline, and vanish again into the sea, carrying with them the lifeblood of the city. Each morning before sunrise, he trudged down the uneven cobblestones, salt air filling his lungs, and each evening he returned home with his clothes stiff with sweat and seawater. Through storms and strikes, through injuries that would have driven others into early disability, Elias endured. He endured because he believed that the life he built was not only for himself but for his family, for the son he had raised alone after his wife passed, for the future that boy would inherit. The day he walked away from the docks for the last time was not marked by fanfare or parades. There was no gold watch, no company dinner, no speech of recognition, but there was a quiet satisfaction in Elias's chest as he folded his work jacket, placed it on the back of his chair, and shook the hand of the foreman. His body carried the aches of 67 years, but his heart was light with the thought of mornings without alarm bells and nights without exhaustion pressing him into silence. Driving home through the crooked streets of the Portside district, Elias imagined the warmth of a family dinner, the sparkle of his son's smile, perhaps even a toast of cheap wine to mark the occasion. He imagined Victor now, a man in his 30s, clapping him on the back and saying, "You have earned this, Dad. You carried us through." When Elias opened the door to the modest house where they lived together, he found Victor at the table with his wife Marissa. The smell of baked bread and onion soup hung in the air. Elias entered with a proud grin, carrying the good news on his lips. "Today," he said brightly, "was my last day at the docks. I am finally retired." The words dropped into the room like stones into water, and the silence that followed rippled sharp and cold. Victor's fork slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate. Marissa's eyes widened, then narrowed as if measuring the weight of his announcement. Elias stood tall, waiting for their laughter, their cheers, the release of shared joy. None came. Instead, Victor's face flushed red, a tension rising in his jaw. "Retired," he repeated, his voice clipped. "You mean you quit your job?" Elias nodded slowly, the smile on his lips trembling under the unexpected edge in his son's tone. "After 40 years, I thought we could celebrate." "Celebrate," Marissa cut in her words sharp as glass. "Celebrate that we now have another mouth to feed." Her water glass hit the table with a dull thud. "Victor works long hours already. And now you expect us to support you." The warmth in Elias's chest collapsed into a hollow chill. He looked from his son to his daughter-in-law, waiting for Victor to object, to soften her words with reason or affection. Instead, Victor leaned forward, his voice steady with the authority of a man who had forgotten where he came from. "Listen, Dad, I cannot carry this house and you too. I am not feeding an extra mouth. If you want to stay here, you will get another job. I do not care if it is scrubbing floors or stacking shelves, but you are not going to sit here living off my paycheck." Each word struck Elias like a physical blow, harder than any crate he had carried at the docks. He stared at the young man across the table, the boy he had once taught to ride a bicycle, whose scraped knees he had bandaged, whose college tuition he had paid in full. That boy was gone, replaced by a stranger whose eyes held only irritation. Marissa folded her arms, nodding with satisfaction. "You are 67, not 90, she said. "Plenty of men your age work." My father's neighbor bags groceries every day. There is no excuse. Elias opened his mouth, but Victor cut him off with a dismissive gesture. Do you have any idea what it costs to run this house? The bills, the food, the insurance. Money does not grow on trees, Dad. I work 50 hours a week at Harlan Shipping just to keep us above water. I cannot carry dead weight. The words echoed in Elias's mind, twisting deeper with each repetition. Dead weight, burden, extra mouth. His untouched bowl of soup grew cold before him. The bread, once fragrant, now smelled of bitterness. He felt as though he were staring at his life through a warped mirror, everything familiar, yet grotesquely altered. You are right, Elias said quietly at last, his voice rough with the effort of restraint. I should have spoken with you first. Victor's expression softened, but only slightly. Good. We will find something suitable for you. The conversation ended as quickly as it had begun, with Marissa gathering plates as though nothing unusual had happened. Victor switched on the radio, his tone light again, as he spoke to his wife about errands and groceries. Elias sat alone at the table, the weight of their dismissal pressing against his chest. That night, in the cramped attic room where he slept, Elias lay staring at the cracked ceiling beams. The sounds of the house crept through the thin walls, the low hum of the radio, the clatter of dishes, the muffled laughter of his son and daughter-in-law. But beneath that laughter was another sound, faint but distinct, the low murmur of their voices carrying through the wall that separated their room from his. He shifted onto his side, straining to catch their words. His heart pounded as he realized they were speaking of him. Can you believe he just walked in and announced it? Victor muttered, his tone heavy with irritation. He thinks he can just sit at home now, eating my food and doing nothing. So what if he worked 40 years, Marissa whispered. That does not give him the right to live on your salary. If he refuses to work, then we will take his pension and put him in a care home. Enough is enough. Elias froze, his breath caught in his throat. Care home. Dead weight. The words he had hoped were momentary anger now returned, sharpened, cruel, and deliberate. His hand clenched the blanket until his knuckles turned white. Marissa continued, her voice low, but cruelly certain. He has been living here since your mother died, eating our food, adding to our bills. He should be grateful we have not already given him an ultimatum. Victor gave a short laugh. Maybe we should. 1 week to find work, or he is out. If he complains, we will remind him that beggars cannot be choosers. Their laughter floated through the wall, casual and merciless. Elias stared into the darkness, every sacrifice of his life, rushing back to him with merciless clarity. The nights he had worked double shifts so Victor could buy school books. The weekends he had skipped meals to pay for university fees. The money he had given for Victor's wedding, the mortgage he had quietly finished paying so they would not drown in debt. Every step of his life had been built on sacrifice for them, and now they spoke of him as though he were a parasite. For a moment, despair threatened to crush him, but beneath that despair something else stirred, a spark of cold anger, sharp and unyielding. They thought him weak. They thought him powerless, a burden to be cast aside. But Elias Kane was not the helpless old man they believed. He closed his eyes, his breathing steadying as a plan began to form. His modest life had been a choice, a mask worn for decades while the truth remained hidden. The fortune he had built, the connections he had nurtured, the power he still held were invisible to them. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, silence for surrender, and for that mistake they would pay. The house grew quiet as Victor and Marissa drifted into sleep. Elias remained awake, staring into the dark beams above him. His mind no longer churned with doubt, but with certainty. Tomorrow, he thought, would begin a new chapter. They would see not the shadow of a worn dock worker, but the truth of the man they had underestimated. And as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the roof, Elias Kane whispered to himself, "Let them laugh now. Soon they will know who I really am." The next evening, Elias Kane sat quietly at the dinner table, his spoon moving through the stew without appetite. Victor and Marissa chatted easily, as though the words they had spoken the night before had evaporated into nothing. They laughed at a story about a coworker, argued lightly about grocery prices, and discussed a new shipment Victor's company had received at the port. To them, everything was ordinary, the same rhythm of their lives continuing as though Elias's presence was no more than another piece of furniture in the room. But for Elias, nothing was ordinary anymore. Every syllable of their laughter was poisoned by the words he had overheard. He could still hear Marissa's voice, sharp and cold, speaking of him as dead weight. He could still hear Victor's smug suggestion that he should be given a deadline or sent to a home. Their voices had carved themselves into his memory, louder even than the roar of the ocean waves he had lived beside for decades. He did not speak of what he had heard. He did not accuse, did not ask, why did not cry out for gratitude. Instead, he smiled faintly, nodding at the right moments, hiding his turmoil behind calm eyes. But inside, something in him had shifted. The father who had endured for the sake of peace was gone. The man who remained was watchful, patient, and quietly dangerous. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the house settled again into its nightly stillness, Elias climbed the creaking stairs to his attic room. He did not light the lamp. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed in darkness, listening once more to the murmur of voices through the walls. The words came slowly at first, half muffled by plaster and wood, but as Victor grew heated, they sharpened like blades cutting through cloth. "He is going to ruin us," Victor whispered. "If he refuses to work, it is my income that keeps this house standing." "You are right," Marissa agreed. "We cannot afford him just sitting here pretending he has earned his peace. Peace is for those who can pay for it. He cannot. And if he tries to resist, then we will use his pension. It is the least he can give after all these years of taking from us." Elias closed his eyes and clenched his fists. Taking from us. The words echoed in his skull, mocking every scar on his hands, every sleepless night he had spent earning the very roof above their heads. Through the thin wall, he heard Marissa's voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you think he has savings tucked away somewhere? Perhaps something hidden. Men like him often keep a little nest egg. If he does, we will find it. It should belong to us anyway." Victor laughed softly, a laugh Elias had never heard before, cruel and dismissive. "He has nothing. If he did, why would he still be living with us? He is pathetic, a relic of a man who thinks his labor was worth something. Let him find work, or let him rot in a care home. Either way, he will not drag us down." The silence that followed was worse than their words. It was the silence of certainty. The silence of two people who believed their cruelty was justified. Elias sat unmoving, his chest, rising and falling with slow control. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. He would not stumble into their traps begging for forgiveness or offering apologies for sins he had never committed. Instead, he thought back on the years when Victor was still a boy, the years when sacrifice had meant love rather than bitterness. He remembered the nights when Victor cried from the pain of growing bones, and Elias held him against his chest until dawn. He remembered the afternoons when Victor brought home failing grades, and Elias sat with him at the table for hours, patient, gentle, guiding him through every mistake until the boy understood. He remembered the moment he sold his own father's watch to pay for Victor's university application fee, never mentioning the loss, only smiling when Victor's acceptance letter arrived. And yet now the man who owed him everything planned his betrayal. Elias rose from the bed and moved to the dresser where an old wooden box rested beneath folded clothes. He opened it slowly, revealing a collection of letters, photographs, and worn slips of paper. They were fragments of a past. Victor and Marissa knew nothing about hints of connections and choices Elias had carefully hidden. His fingers brushed the edges of documents that represented investments, promises, and secrets stretching back decades. To the untrained eye, they were meaningless scraps. To Elias, they were weapons waiting for the right moment. He closed the box again, slid it beneath the bed, and returned to the silence. His mind was no longer clouded by despair. It was clear now, sharpened by betrayal into a focus as precise as a blade. They believed he had nothing. They believed he was powerless. Soon he would prove them wrong. The following morning, Victor confronted him at the breakfast table, his tone sharp and commanding. Dad, I have been thinking. You need to start working again. Harlan Shipping has openings for janitorial staff. I can speak to my supervisor and have you placed there. It will be simple work, something you cannot fail at. At least then you will be paying your way. Elias looked at his son and forced his lips into a thin smile. That sounds reasonable, he replied softly. I will be grateful for anything you arrange. Victor seemed satisfied, puffing his chest as though he had solved the world's problems. Marissa smirked at her husband's side, her eyes glinting with triumph. To them, Elias's agreement was proof of his submission, proof that they had broken the old man into obedience. They did not see the storm gathering beneath the calm surface. That night, once they had gone to bed, Elias lay awake again, listening to the whispers behind the walls. Did you see how easily he gave in? Marissa murmured. He will be scrubbing floors like a fool, and we will finally be free of his weight. Victor chuckled. It is about time. He has lived off us long enough. Once he is working, I will remind him that he should hand over his pension too. He owes us that much. Elias's heart no longer ached at their cruelty. Instead, a strange calm filled him, the calm of a man who has already seen the ending of the story while others stumble blindly through its beginning. He knew what Victor and Marissa could not imagine. He knew that Harlan Shipping was not simply a company where his son worked. It was the empire he himself had helped to build, the empire whose roots reached back to the investments he had made long before Victor was born. As the house settled into sleep and silence thickened around him, Elias whispered into the dark, You think you hold the cards, but soon you will learn who built the table you play upon. His eyes closed at last, but his mind remained awake, charting every step of the revelation to come. The time for patience was nearly over. The time for truth was close at hand. Morning sunlight spilled through the narrow attic window, laying stripes of gold across the floorboards. Elias Kane sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the box he had pulled from beneath it. His hands rested on the lid as though it were a sacred chest, and in a way it was. Inside lay the truth, a truth hidden for decades, a truth even his son did not know. The box was small and unremarkable, its hinges rusted, and its surface scarred with scratches from years of use. Victor would have walked past it 100 times without a second thought. But to Elias, every paper inside carried the weight of years, choices, and secrets. Slowly he lifted the lid and revealed the stack of documents within. There were faded letters tied with twine photographs curling at the edges, and slips of paper that looked meaningless at a glance. Yet each piece told a story of a life lived carefully, strategically, always 2 steps ahead of those who thought they understood him. Elias reached for one particular folder thick with contracts and receipts. The ink had faded, but the names and numbers still carried power. It had been more than 30 years ago when Elias first met Samuel Harland. At that time, Harland was not the proud owner of a shipping empire, but a desperate man with a dream. His company was nothing more than a skeleton crew, a handful of ships held together by borrowed money and stubborn ambition. The docks buzzed with doubt, whispers that Harland would sink before he ever rose. But Elias had seen something different. He had watched Samuel work through storms, refusing to leave the yard until every crate was loaded. He had seen the hunger in his eyes, the kind of hunger Elias knew could build kingdoms. And so when Samuel approached him with an idea, an investment that would demand every coin Elias could spare, he did not hesitate. $500,000. The number had nearly stolen his breath. It was more money than Elias had ever held in his hands, more than most men at the docks would see in a lifetime. But Elias had already built a modest fortune through years of saving, cutting corners, and quiet side dealings. He had lived simply, never boasting of what he truly owned. That night the 2 men sat in a small garage lit by a single hanging bulb. Samuel's voice shook with excitement as he laid out his plans while Elias listened carefully, every instinct alive with the knowledge that this was a crossroads. Finally, Elias extended his hand, sealing the deal with the kind of trust men no longer gave lightly. I believe in you, Elias had said, and I believe this company will stand as long as the sea itself does. Samuel's eyes had gleamed with gratitude, and the two men shook hands. From that night onward, Harlan Shipping began to grow. It was slow at first, just a trickle of profit, but year by year it swelled into a tide that lifted them both. Ships multiplied, routes expanded, and the once mocked name of Samuel Harland became synonymous with power. Elias never flaunted his role in the empire. He allowed Samuel to be the face, the voice, the man in the spotlight. Elias chose instead to remain in the shadows, content to let others believe he was a simple laborer. It gave him freedom, anonymity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had built something far larger than himself. Now, as he leafed through the contracts, Elias's eyes fell on the one number that mattered most: 37%. That was his share of Harlan Shipping. 37% of a company that spanned coasts, employed thousands, and handled more cargo than any competitor in the region. And his own son working as a middle manager there had no idea. Elias set the folder aside and picked up a photograph. It showed him and Samuel standing together in front of the company's first real office building, their smiles wide, their suits wrinkled from long hours. He remembered the thrill of that day, the pride of knowing that what they had built from scraps was now a foundation. He sighed. All these years he had allowed Victor to believe they lived from paycheck to paycheck. He had chosen modesty over luxury, believing it would teach his son humility, teach him the value of work and sacrifice. Elias had wanted to see what kind of man Victor would become without the easy lure of wealth. But now the truth burned bitter in his chest. His son had not grown into the man Elias had hoped for. Instead of gratitude, there was entitlement. Instead of respect, disdain. Instead of love, cold calculation. Downstairs, Elias could hear the clink of dishes as Marissa prepared lunch. Her laughter carried faintly up the stairwell light and careless. He wondered how she would look if she knew the truth, if she realized the man she mocked as dead weight was wealthier than both of them combined. Yet Elias had no desire to flaunt his fortune. No, the truth would be revealed at the right time in the right way when it would cut deepest. For now patience was his ally and secrecy his shield. That afternoon Elias took a walk along the docks, his cane tapping against the weathered planks. The air was thick with salt gulls circled overhead, and the cries of workers filled the air. He passed men who still remembered him, old dockhands who nodded respectfully at his presence. To them he was one of their own, a man who had carried crates beside them, bled beside them. They did not know he was also one of the men who now owned the ships towering in the harbor. As he walked, Elias spotted Samuel Harland in the distance, overseeing the inspection of a cargo vessel. Samuel had aged too, his hair silver, his back slightly bent, but his voice still carried the same authority as it had all those years ago. Elias considered approaching him, telling him the truth of what was happening inside his own home. But he stopped himself. Not yet. Samuel would play his role soon enough, but the stage had not been set. When Elias returned home, Victor was waiting with news. "I spoke to my supervisor," Victor announced proudly. "There's an opening in janitorial at Harlan Shipping. I told him I had someone reliable who needed the work." He agreed. "You start Monday morning." Marissa stood beside him, her smile thin and mocking. "It will be good for you," she said. "Honest work, and you can finally stop being a burden." Elias looked at them both, his expression carefully controlled. Inside, a smile threatened to rise, but he buried it beneath a mask of meekness. "Thank you," he said softly. "I am grateful for your help." Victor puffed his chest, clearly satisfied. "You see, Dad, things are finally falling into place. Just do your job and follow orders. No more trouble." Marissa nodded in agreement, her hand resting smugly on her husband's arm. Elias excused himself and climbed back to the attic. Once the door was closed behind him, he allowed himself a smile at last. The irony was almost too sharp to bear. His son, proud and condescending, had arranged for him to take a janitor's job at the very company Elias had helped build at the empire that existed only because of his faith and sacrifice. The game had begun. As Elias sat in the quiet of his room, he thought again of the box beneath his bed, the documents that told the story Victor and Marissa could not imagine. He knew the time was coming when those papers, those secrets, would no longer remain hidden. He would play the role of the obedient old man for now, but the day was near when truth would strip away their arrogance and reveal who truly held the power. For now, he would let them believe they had won. For now, he would let them think he was defeated. But Monday was approaching, and with it the moment that would change everything. Monday crept closer with the slow inevitability of the tide. Elias Kane carried himself through the weekend in silence, watching Victor and Marissa with eyes that seemed weary but hid a storm waiting to break. He gave no hint of his true thoughts, no sign of the plans forming in the quiet hours of the night. To them he was the same old man, meek and dependent, grateful for the opportunity they had forced upon him. On Saturday evening, as the rain tapped against the windows, Victor outlined the details of the arrangement with the air of a man granting charity. "You start at 7 sharp," Victor said, his voice brisk, as though he were delivering orders to an employee. "The work is simple. Sweep the floors, mop when needed, empty trash. No responsibility, no stress. Even you should be able to handle it." Marissa leaned against the doorway, her arms folded, her lips curved into a faint smirk. "It will be good for you, Elias. Honest work, no more excuses. At least this way you'll contribute something instead of draining us." Elias sat at the table, his fingers curled loosely around a chipped mug of tea. He raised his eyes to them and gave a slow nod. "Yes," he said softly, "honest work is nothing to be ashamed of. I will do it." Victor seemed satisfied, puffing his chest like a man who believed himself victorious. "That's the spirit. See, Marissa, I told you he'd come around once he faced reality." Marissa gave a small laugh, the sound sharp and cutting. "Reality has a way of humbling people," she said. "Better he learns it late than never at all." Elias lowered his gaze to his tea, hiding the spark in his eyes. They thought he had surrendered, thought he had been beaten into submission. Let them believe it. Sometimes the sweetest revenge required the patience of silence. That night, when the house was dark and the others slept, Elias returned to his attic room and opened the small wooden box once more. He spread the papers across the bed, reviewing each page with meticulous care. Contracts, investments, letters signed by Samuel Harland himself. Proof not only of his wealth, but of his position. Proof that the empire his son boasted about each day had been built in part by his hands. He ran his fingers over one document, in particular the original agreement signed in Samuel's garage all those years ago. The paper was yellowed now, fragile at the edges, but the ink still burned strong. $500,000. A handshake that had grown into a fleet. 37% of Harlan shipping. Victor would never have believed it. Marissa would have laughed in his face. But Elias knew that the day was coming when the truth would strike them like thunder, and when it did they would not be laughing. On Sunday morning, Victor entered the attic unannounced, catching Elias as he folded the box away. For a brief, dangerous moment, Elias thought the younger man had seen the papers. But Victor's eyes were focused elsewhere, scanning the modest room with disdain. "You'd better be ready," Victor said. "Don't embarrass me tomorrow. I vouched for you with my supervisor. He's taking a risk letting you in. If you make me look like a fool, I swear, Dad, I'll send you to a care home myself." Elias let the words pass over him like a cold wind. He nodded slowly as though cowed. "I understand, son. I won't let you down." Victor gave a curt nod and left satisfied that he had established his dominance. Elias sat back on the bed, a smile touching his lips once the door closed. If only his son knew how close he was to kneeling in his own arrogance. The dawn of Monday arrived gray and damp, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Elias dressed slowly in the work clothes Victor had purchased for him, stiff new fabric that smelled faintly of chemicals. To Victor it was a uniform of humiliation, a reminder that his father was no more than a janitor now. To Elias it was a costume, nothing more. A mask to wear until the truth revealed itself. Victor drove him to Harlan Shipping in silence, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. The company's headquarters loomed in the distance, a sleek tower of glass and steel rising from the harbor's edge. Victor's voice finally broke the silence as they pulled into the parking lot. "Remember what I told you," he said firmly. "Stay quiet, follow instructions, don't speak to anyone unless spoken to. You're here to work, not to cause trouble. Understand, yes, Victor, Elias said calmly. I understand. Victor exhaled, satisfied. Good. If you can manage this without making me look bad, maybe things will finally settle down around here. They entered through the service entrance, the air inside cool and sterile. The polished floors gleamed, reflecting the overhead lights. Employees bustled through the hallways, carrying papers and coffee cups, their conversations clipped and hurried. To them, Elias was invisible, just another worker in plain clothes shuffling behind his son. Victor thrust a mop into his father's hands with barely concealed satisfaction. Here, he said, make yourself useful. When Mr. Harland walks through, I want him to see you working. Do not give him any reason to question you. Elias accepted the mop, his expression meek, but inside his chest his heart beat with a strange exhilaration. To be standing here in the halls of the Empire he had helped build, pretending to be nothing more than a cleaner, it was a theater more dramatic than anything he could have written himself. The irony was so sharp he almost laughed aloud. As the morning unfolded, Elias moved quietly through the corridors, the mop gliding across the floor in steady arcs. He studied the faces of the employees, many of whom he recognized from meetings he had once attended in secret. They did not see him. To them he was just another old man earning his keep. But he knew it was only a matter of time before the curtain lifted. Samuel Harland made his rounds every morning, walking the halls, speaking with workers, ensuring the pulse of the company remained steady. And when Samuel came, the truth would step into the light. Elias finished a long sweep of the lobby and paused by the wide glass windows looking out over the harbor. The ships stood tall against the horizon, their flags snapping in the wind. They were his ships as much as they were Samuel's. His investment had carried them across oceans, his sacrifice had anchored them against storms. And yet here he stood mop in hand, playing the role of a forgotten old man. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Elias turned, his heart tightening in anticipation. Victor straightened his tie, his posture stiff with nervous pride. There he is, Victor whispered. Mr. Harland himself. Remember, stay quiet. Samuel Harland appeared at the far end of the hall, his silver hair gleaming beneath the lights, his stride steady and confident. His eyes swept the hallway as he approached, landing briefly on Elias before moving past. Then Samuel stopped. His gaze returned, lingering recognition dawning. Elias lowered his eyes, pretending to focus on the mop, but his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. The moment had come. Victor stepped forward eagerly. Mr. Harland, he called, his voice filled with practiced respect. Perfect timing. I wanted to introduce you to our newest janitor. This is my father. He'll be working here from now on. The words hung in the air, heavy with arrogance. Samuel's expression froze, then darkened his eyes, flicking between Victor and Elias. The silence stretched thick with unspoken tension. Victor's smile wavered. Is there a problem, sir? Samuel's voice came quiet but sharp as steel. Do you have any idea who you've brought into this building with a mop in his hands? Victor blinked in confusion, his confidence cracking. My father, sir. Just a janitor. Samuel's gaze sharpened. That man is no janitor. That man is Elias Kane, one of the men who built this company. Without him, Harland Shipping would not exist. Elias straightened slowly, letting the mop fall against the wall. He met Samuel's eyes, and in that silent exchange, the years of loyalty, sacrifice, and shared history spoke louder than words. Victor's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came. The truth had struck him harder than any blow. And in that frozen moment, Elias felt the balance shift. The game had begun. Victor Kane stood frozen in the hallway of Harland, shipping, his face drained of color as Samuel Harland's words rang through the air. The mop still leaned against the wall where Elias had placed it, but its presence no longer mattered. What mattered was the revelation that had just shattered the illusion Victor had crafted for himself. That man is no janitor, Samuel had said, his voice sharp with disbelief. That man is Elias Kane. Without him, this company would never have been built. For a long, unbearable moment, silence wrapped the corridor. Employees slowed their pace, sensing the tension, but not daring to interrupt. Victor's lips moved, searching for words, but none came. His father, the man he had mocked and belittled, the man he had called dead weight now, stood revealed as one of the architects of the empire Victor served. Samuel's eyes narrowed at Victor. "Do you understand what you have done? You marched your own father into this building and handed him a mop as though he were nothing. Do you know the insult you've placed upon him?" Victor stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his humiliation. I I didn't know. He never told me. He never. That is no excuse," Samuel cut in coldly. "Respect should not be conditional. It is not earned only through wealth. It is owed to the man who raised you." Elias remained silent, his posture calm and steady. His eyes, however, flicked briefly to Victor, catching the storm of shame and panic brewing in his son's expression. It was the look of a man whose power had slipped like sand through his fingers. Samuel turned back to Elias, his tone softening. "Elias, my friend, forgive me. I had no idea you were here in this way. Had I known, I never would have allowed such a thing." Elias gave a faint smile. "It is all right, Samuel. Sometimes life has a way of showing us who people truly are." Samuel studied him carefully, then nodded. "Come with me. We have much to discuss." Victor reached out desperately. "Wait. Please, Mr. Harlan, don't," but Samuel's glare silenced him instantly. "You've said enough." Elias followed Samuel down the corridor, his steps unhurried, each one striking like a drumbeat in Victor's ears. The sight of his father walking side by side with the CEO, like an equal, no, like a partner, carved deep wounds into Victor's pride. He stood rooted in place, his hands trembling at his sides as whispers began to ripple among the employees. By the time Elias and Samuel disappeared into the executive wing, Victor knew his carefully crafted authority was unraveling. Inside Samuel's office, sunlight poured through wide windows overlooking the harbor. The room was a testament to decades of success. Mahogany shelves lined with awards, photographs of milestones, framed maps of shipping routes that stretched across oceans. Samuel gestured toward the leather chair opposite his desk. "Sit, Elias. You shouldn't be treated this way, not after everything you've done for me for this company." Elias lowered himself into the chair, his movements deliberate. "Thank you, Samuel. I admit I hadn't planned for this truth to come out just yet, but perhaps it's better that it has." Samuel studied him with sharp eyes. "Why hide it for so long? Why let your son think you were just another dock worker, when in truth you could have given him a life of wealth?" Elias's lips curved into a sad smile. "Because I wanted to see what kind of man he would become without fortune guiding him. I wanted to know if he'd respect me for who I was, not for what I owned. And now you know," Samuel said grimly. "Yes," Elias replied softly. "Now I know." The two men spoke for nearly an hour, catching up on matters of business and old times. But all the while, Elias's thoughts drifted back to Victor pacing outside, burning with confusion and dread. He could almost feel his son's anxiety like heat rising from the floorboards. When Elias finally emerged, Victor was waiting in the hallway. His eyes darted nervously from Elias to Samuel. "Dad," he whispered harshly, "why didn't you tell me? Why keep this from me all these years?" Elias looked at him steadily. "Would it have changed how you treated me? Or would you have found a different way to disguise your disrespect?" Victor flinched as though struck. His voice lowered further. "Please, you have to help me. If Mr. Harlan thinks I knew, if he thinks I was trying to humiliate you—" Elias cut him off with a single raised hand. "You've already humiliated yourself. The question now is how much further you're willing to fall." Victor's face twisted with anger, shame, and desperation. He opened his mouth to retort, but Samuel's voice boomed from behind. "Victor Kane, my office. Now." Victor paled and obeyed. Elias watched him go, his mind calm but calculating. The first strike had landed. His son's pride had been cracked open, his authority undermined. But this was only the beginning. That evening at home, the silence at the dinner table was heavier than ever. Marissa kept glancing between Elias and Victor, her brow furrowed, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "What happened today?" she asked finally. "You look like death, Victor." Victor shot Elias a glance, but Elias only sipped his tea. "Ask your husband," he said quietly. "He has much to explain." Victor slammed his fork down, his composure unraveling. "He humiliated me," he snapped. "In front of Mr. Harland, in front of everyone." Elias raised his brows. "Did I? Or did the truth humiliate you?" Marissa's eyes narrowed. "What truth?" Victor hesitated, his mouth opening and closing. He could not bring himself to admit it, not yet, not to her. Elias saw the conflict burning inside him and felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Let the man drown in his own secrets. Later that night, Elias returned to his attic, listening once again as Victor and Marissa argued behind the walls. "You're supposed to be climbing the ladder," Marissa hissed, "not dragging us down." "What happened?" Victor's voice was hoarse with frustration. "I don't know. I thought he was nothing, but Mr. Harland treated him like an equal. There's something he's not telling us." "Then find out," Marissa snapped. "Because if your father has been hiding money or power or anything at all, it belongs to us." Elias smiled in the darkness. They were already sniffing, already circling like wolves around a fire they didn't understand. It would not be long before Marissa's greed drove her to overreach. And when she did, Elias would be ready. The next morning, Victor avoided him entirely, leaving early for work without a word. Marissa, however, lingered in the kitchen, her eyes sharp as she poured coffee. "You know, Elias," she said casually, "I've been thinking. For a man who worked the docks his whole life, you seem awfully composed. Almost as if there's something more to your story." Elias met her gaze and gave a faint smile. "Aren't we all more than what we appear?" Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. Still, Elias knew she suspected, and suspicion would soon turn into discovery. By midweek, whispers at Harlan Shipping had spread. Employees spoke quietly in corridors, their curiosity growing. Who was Elias Kane, really? Why did Mr. Harlan treat him with such deference? And why had Victor tried to pass him off as a janitor? The cracks in Victor's reputation widened with each passing day. Where once he strode through the halls with false authority, now his colleagues looked at him with doubt, even disdain. His own arrogance had built the pedestal, and now it was crumbling beneath him. Elias watched it all unfold with calm patience. He did not need to raise his voice or lift a finger. The truth had begun its work, and Victor's downfall had only just begun. On Thursday evening, Elias sat once more in his attic, the wooden box open before him. But this time it was not the documents of Harlan Shipping he studied. It was another folder, one he had set aside weeks earlier. Papers that bore a different name, Marissa Kane. Figures and reports filled the pages, columns that did not add up, invoices that had been carefully altered. He had noticed them once left carelessly on the dining table, and his experienced eye had recognized the pattern immediately. Marissa was hiding something, stealing something. Elias leaned back in his chair, the shadows stretching long across the floor. The first strike against Victor had landed cleanly, but the second he knew would cut even deeper. And when it came, neither Victor nor Marissa would be prepared. The house was silent, except for the faint creaks of settling wood and the occasional sigh of wind through the eaves. Elias Kane sat alone in his attic room, the wooden box open before him. By now the papers inside had become as familiar as the lines on his hands, yet tonight he studied them with renewed focus. One particular stack of documents bore Marissa's name, and the numbers printed across the pages painted a damning story. The evidence had come to him by accident. Weeks earlier, Marissa had left a pile of papers carelessly spread across the dining table, half hidden beneath a magazine. Elias's sharp eye, honed by decades of balancing books and counting every penny during lean years, had noticed the irregularities immediately. Figures that should have matched did not. Expenses seemed inflated, invoices, duplicated sums quietly altered. Most men would have shrugged and walked away, but Elias was not most men. That same night, he had discreetly photographed the documents with his old phone. Later, he reached out to Michael Torrance, an old acquaintance who had built a career in forensic accounting. Michael owed Elias more than one favor debts from a past business venture, where Elias had stepped in to steady the books when everything threatened to collapse. "Take a look at these," Elias had asked over the phone, his tone casual, though his mind burned with suspicion. "Tell me what you see." 3 days later, Michael had called back, his voice carrying both admiration and concern. "Elias, these are falsified. Systematic, careful, but sloppy in places. Someone's been inflating expenses and pocketing the difference. If these records are accurate, she's been siphoning money for months. Maybe longer." Now, as Elias sifted through the papers again, the full picture stood clear. Marissa had been quietly embezzling from her firm Henderson and Wolf Associates. It wasn't a fortune, not compared to what he himself controlled, but it was enough to fund the expensive clothes she paraded in the handbags. She flaunted the little luxuries she insisted were bargains. It was theft, plain and simple, theft disguised behind numbers in ink. Elias leaned back in his chair, the shadows pooling around him. He thought of her sharp smile, her dismissive tone whenever she called him useless. He remembered her voice whispering through the walls, plotting with Victor to seize his pension, mocking him as dead weight. The memory made his jaw tighten, but his heart remained steady. Now the time had come to show her that cruelty carried consequences. He opened his laptop, an old machine whose keys clicked loudly in the quiet room. He created a new email account, one untraceable and anonymous, then began typing with deliberate precision. "Dear Mr. Henderson," he wrote, addressing the head of Marissa's firm, "I am writing to inform you of serious irregularities within your accounting department. Your employee, Marissa Kane, has been altering expense reports and siphoning funds into personal accounts. The attached documents will provide evidence of her actions. I recommend immediate investigation." He paused, then carefully attached the files, the side-by-side comparisons. Michael had prepared the photographs, he himself had taken the invoices, that proved without question what Marissa had been doing. The evidence was airtight, impossible to dismiss as error or oversight. Elias read the email twice, ensuring every word carried the right weight. Then, with a steady hand, he clicked send. The message disappeared into the ether, carrying with it the first cracks of Marissa's carefully polished facade. Elias closed the laptop and slid the papers back into their folder. The shredder in the corner hummed quietly as he fed in the extra copies, leaving nothing but thin ribbons that curled like ashes. For the first time in weeks, Elias allowed himself to sleep deeply. The trap was set. Now he only needed to wait. The strike came sooner than he expected. It was late afternoon the next day when Elias heard the front door slam, followed by hurried footsteps. Marissa entered the living room, her face blotchy, and red, her eyes swollen from tears. Her hair, usually styled to perfection, hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. She clutched her handbag as though it were a lifeline, her hands trembling. Elias looked up from his chair, feigning surprise. "Marissa, what's wrong?" She sank into the armchair across from him, her breath uneven. They think I've been stealing," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mr. Henderson called me into his office. He had papers, receipts, everything laid out in front of me. He said someone sent it to him. Anonymous. They suspended me. They're bringing in auditors. Elias, they're going to ruin me." Elias leaned forward, his brow furrowed in feigned concern. "That's terrible news. Who would do such a thing?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't know. But whoever it was, they've been watching me for months. They had every detail, even the smallest things. It's like they knew exactly what to look for." Elias hid the satisfaction that surged inside him. Outwardly, he shook his head with sympathy. "Perhaps it's a mistake. Surely it will be cleared up." Marissa let out a bitter laugh. "Cleared up? The evidence is too detailed. They showed me comparisons, invoices, even photographs of documents I had at home. How could anyone get that? Unless—" Her eyes flickered toward him, briefly, suspicion flashing, but she quickly looked away. "No. That's impossible. Elias remained calm, his voice gentle. You should tell Victor. He'll want to know. Her face crumpled further. I can't. He's already furious about what happened with you and Mr. Harland. If he finds out about this about me, he'll never forgive me. Just then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway cut through her words. Victor's heavy footsteps followed the front doors, swinging open with force. His tie hung loose around his neck, his face pale with exhaustion. When he saw Marissa's tear-stained cheeks, his expression hardened. What did he do to you? Victor barked, glaring at Elias. What did you say to her? Nothing, Elias replied evenly. She came in like this. Marissa raised a trembling hand. It's not your father, Victor. It's work. They think I've been stealing. Victor froze the words, hitting him like a blow. Stealing? That's impossible. You wouldn't. They have evidence, she interrupted, her voice breaking. Detailed evidence. Anonymous reports, documents. I don't know who sent them, but it's enough to destroy me. Victor's face contorted with disbelief, then fury. Who would do this to us? Who would target our family like this? Elias watched silently, his face carefully neutral. Inside, he felt the threads of his plan tightening around them like a noose. Victor turned on him suddenly, his voice rising. Was it you? Did you have something to do with this? Elias met his gaze without flinching. Why would I? I'm just an old man, remember? Too useless to be trusted with anything important. The words stung their echo, reminding Victor of his own cruelty. He clenched his fists, his face flushing with frustration, but he said nothing. Marissa buried her face in her hands. What are we going to do, Victor? If they press charges, if they fire me, we'll lose everything. The bills, the mortgage. Your job barely covers it all. We can't survive this. Victor paced the room, his steps heavy, his mind spiraling. Then we'll fix it. Somehow. But for now, his eyes flicked toward Elias again, filled with resentment. Don't think this means you're off the hook. You've already embarrassed me at work once. Tomorrow you're coming with me. No excuses, no mistakes. If you cross me again, I swear you'll regret it. Elias nodded quietly, hiding the smile that threatened to rise. Tomorrow, indeed, would bring new revelations, but they would not be the ones Victor expected. That night the house was heavy with silence. Marissa cried softly in the master bedroom, while Victor muttered curses under his breath. Through the thin wall, Elias heard every word. She's ruined us, Victor hissed. First my father, now her. Everyone's against me. You'll fix it, Marissa pleaded through her sobs. You have to. If you don't, we'll lose everything. Elias lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The trap had tightened around them both, and yet they still believed themselves. Victims still believed the world conspired against them rather than admitting their own greed had planted the seeds of ruin. Tomorrow, Elias thought, would be the beginning of the end. He would walk once more into the halls of Harland Shipping. Victor would drag him there, thinking he still held authority. And when Samuel Harland greeted him again, not as a janitor but as a partner, the final threads of his son's arrogance would unravel. Elias closed his eyes and allowed himself the luxury of a quiet smile. The storm was gathering, and he was ready to unleash it. The morning air was sharp with the bite of salt and rain as Elias Kane stood by the front door, dressed once again in the stiff janitor's uniform Victor had purchased for him. The fabric scratched against his skin, but he wore it like armor, knowing this costume would play its final role today. Downstairs, Victor paced with restless energy, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his movements jerky with nervous anger. Are you ready? Victor demanded, his tone clipped. Because I won't let you humiliate me again. Today you'll do your job. No confusion, no excuses, no games. Do you understand? Elias gave a small nod. I understand. Good, Victor muttered, grabbing his keys. If you make me look like a fool in front of Mr. Harland again, I swear I'll... He cut himself off, his jaw tightening. Just don't. Not today. Elias followed him silently to the car. Marissa appeared in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes still swollen from the previous night's tears. She said nothing, but her gaze followed them with quiet desperation, as though hoping Victor's fragile control would hold. Elias met her eyes briefly. offering no comfort, only the steady calm of a man who knew what was coming. The drive to Harlan Shipping was cloaked in silence. Victor gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Elias sat in the passenger seat, watching the streets pass by in slow rhythm each turn, bringing them closer to the truth. Rain streaked against the windshield, and the city's towers rose like steel guardians in the distance. When the headquarters came into view, Victor's chest swelled with forced pride. "There it is," he said, gesturing toward the gleaming building. 3,000 employees, a multi-million-dollar operation. This is what success looks like, Dad. Not living off others, not taking handouts. This, Elias regarded the glass and steel tower quietly, his lips curving into a faint smile. Success, he thought, built with the sweat of men like me. Success made possible by the faith I placed in Samuel Harland when no one else would. And today you'll finally see the truth of it. They parked near the main entrance, Victor's hands trembling slightly as he killed the engine. He turned sharply to Elias. "Whatever happens in there, follow my lead. You stay quiet, you keep your head down, and you thank them for giving you this chance." "Do you hear me?" "Of course," Elias said softly. Inside, the marble floors gleamed beneath the bright lights. Employees hurried through the halls with purposeful steps, their voices rising in bursts of conversation. Victor led the way, his posture stiff, his face set into the mask of a man clinging to authority by his fingertips. He thrust a mop and bucket into Elias's hands, his eyes daring him to resist. "Make it look real," Victor hissed. "When Mr. Harlan comes by, I want him to see you working. No slip-ups this time." Elias accepted the mop with a calm nod, his expression meek. But inside, anticipation thrummed like the steady beat of drums. The performance was nearly over. The curtain was about to rise. The moment came quickly. Footsteps echoed down the hall, steady and confident. Elias looked up to see Samuel Harlan striding toward them, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his expression focused as he reviewed the tablet in his hands. Victor straightened immediately, smoothing his tie, his chest puffing with false pride. "Mr. Harland," he called out, his voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "Perfect timing, sir." Samuel looked up, his eyes falling first on Victor, then shifting to Elias. For a brief instant, recognition flickered across his face, though he said nothing. Victor stepped forward, eagerly gesturing to the man beside him. "This is my father, our new janitor. I arranged everything myself. Thought it would solve two problems at once, staffing for the building and his need to pull his own weight." The words spilled out with smug satisfaction, hanging in the air like a challenge. Samuel stopped walking. His gaze lingered on Elias, then shifted back to Victor with a slow-growing fury. The air seemed to cool the corridor, falling into hushed silence as nearby employees turned curious glances their way. Janitor Samuel said at last, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, sir," Victor replied quickly, mistaking Samuel's silence for approval. "He's grateful for the opportunity." "Aren't you, Dad?" Elias kept his eyes lowered, playing the role one last time. "Very grateful," he murmured. But Samuel's face darkened, his voice sharp as a blade. "Victor Kane, do you have any idea what you've just done?" Victor blinked, his confidence faltering. I gave my father a job, sir. Solved a problem." Samuel's words cracked like thunder. "You brought Elias Kane, one of the largest shareholders of this company, into my building with a mop in his hands, and you dared to call it a solution." The silence shattered with gasps. Employees froze in their tracks, eyes widening as the truth rippled through them. Whispers began, names and words passing like wildfire. Victor's face drained of blood. His mouth opened, then closed again, soundless like a fish gasping on the deck of a ship. "That's impossible," he whispered. Samuel stepped closer, his voice rising now with fury. "Impossible. 25 years ago, when Harlan Shipping was nothing but a dream in a garage, your father invested $500,000 to build it. Without him, there would be no ships, no offices, no jobs. Without him, you wouldn't have a paycheck at all." Victor staggered back, his world collapsing beneath him. The pedestal of arrogance he had built crumbled into dust. Samuel's gaze hardened. "You're finished here. Clean out your office. Security will escort you out." As of this moment, your employment is terminated. The words rang through the corridor like a sentence passed by a judge. Employees stared openly now, whispers swelling into a storm. Victor's briefcase slipped from his fingers and struck the marble floor with a hollow crack. His eyes darted wildly between Samuel and Elias, pleading silently for some shred of mercy. But none came. Elias let the mop fall against the wall. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened to his full height, shedding the submissive posture like an old cloak. His eyes met Samuel's steady and clear, and for the first time that day he spoke with the weight of truth. "Perhaps we should speak privately," Elias said. "There's much to discuss." Samuel gave a curt nod. "Yes, my office." Together the two men turned and walked down the hall side by side like the partners they had always been. Behind them, Victor remained rooted to the spot, his face ashen, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his downfall. Inside Samuel's office, the atmosphere was heavy with silence. The windows stretched floor to ceiling, revealing the vast sprawl of the harbor. Ships moved slowly across the water, their silhouettes dark against the gray sky. Samuel gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit, Elias." Elias settled into the seat, the same seat where he had sat countless times before, when business was discussed, when futures were planned. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes burning with a mixture of respect and anger. "Tell me why you allowed this. Why did you let your son parade you in here as though you were some beggar needing scraps?" Elias exhaled slowly. "Because I wanted to see what kind of man he had become. I wanted to know if he would show respect, even when he thought there was nothing to gain. Now I have my answer." Samuel shook his head, disgust clear on his face. "The arrogance, the cruelty. To treat you that way, to threaten you from what I've heard with a care home. Elias, it's unforgivable." Elias's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. "It's not about forgiveness anymore. It's about truth. And truth has a way of finding its own justice." Through the glass, Elias could see the city stretching into the distance, every street, and Doc a reminder of the sacrifices he had made. Behind that glass, his son sat somewhere below, broken by his own ignorance. The door creaked open suddenly. Victor stood in the threshold, pale and trembling, his eyes bloodshot, his voice raw. "Dad, please, tell him it isn't true. Tell him I didn't know. I can fix this. I can make it right." Elias turned slowly, his gaze cold. "No, Victor, you cannot fix what you never valued. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned, and you failed." Victor's knees buckled, and he sank into a chair, uninvited, his head falling into his hands. The sound of muffled sobs filled the room. Samuel looked to Elias, his expression grim. "What do you want me to do with him?" Elias considered his son for a long, silent moment. Finally he spoke his words, calm but final. "Nothing more than what you've already done. The rest is his to live with." Victor lifted his head, his eyes wide and wet. "Please, Dad. I didn't mean it. I was just angry. I didn't mean what I said about you being a burden. I didn't mean the threats." Elias's voice cut him like ice. "Yes, you did. And that's what makes it worse." The office fell into silence once more, broken only by the faint hum of ships moving in the harbor. Elias rose from his chair, his posture tall and strong. He looked at his son one final time, then turned to Samuel. "I think it's time I finally retire properly. On my own terms." Samuel nodded gravely. "You've earned it, Elias. More than anyone." As Elias walked toward the door, he paused, glancing back at Victor. "Learn this, son. Wealth doesn't define a man, but how he treats others when he thinks they have nothing, that reveals everything." Without another word, Elias stepped into the hallway, the sound of his steady footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Behind him, Victor sat in silence, his life unraveling, his arrogance stripped bare. The reveal was complete, but Elias knew the reckoning was not over yet. Marissa's secrets still lingered in the shadows, waiting to come to light. And when they did, the fall would be complete. Elias Kane walked out of Samuel Harlan's office with the steady composure of a man who had carried his truth in silence for far too long. The air in the corridor felt lighter, as though the weight of years had finally lifted from his shoulders. Around him, employees whispered and stared, their glances shifting from confusion to awe as word spread. The janitor they had seen with a mop was no janitor at all, but one of the men who had built the empire they served. Victor trailed behind him at a distance, his steps dragging, his eyes hollow with shame. No words passed between father and son as they left the building together. The storm that had broken inside Harlan Shipping was not yet finished, and both men knew it. The drive home was silent. Victor's hands trembled on the wheel, his mouth opening once or twice as though to speak, but each time no words came. Elias sat calmly in the passenger seat, watching the rain streak across the glass. He had no need to speak. The truth had already done the talking. When they arrived home, Marissa was waiting in the living room. She rose quickly, her eyes searching Victor's face for answers. "Well," she demanded, "what happened? Did he show up this time? Did he do his job?" Victor didn't answer. He slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Marissa turned sharply to Elias, her voice rising. "What did you do to him?" Elias met her gaze, his expression calm. "Nothing he didn't bring on himself." Marissa frowned, confusion flickering across her features. Then slowly, suspicion hardened her voice. "There's something you're not telling us. Something about you. I can feel it. Victor, what happened at the company?" Victor lifted his head, his face pale. His voice broke as he spoke. "He's not who we thought he was," Mr. Harlan said. "He said my father owns a third of the company, that without him there would be no Harlan Shipping. I humiliated him in front of everyone, and now I've lost everything." Marissa froze, the color draining from her cheeks. She turned back to Elias, her voice trembling. "Is it true? You've been rich this whole time? You let us believe you were broke, let us carry you while you sat on a fortune." Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. "You didn't carry me. I carried you. Every bill you thought was a struggle I eased behind the scenes. Every step of your comfortable life was paved with my sacrifices. And yet you called me a burden?" Marissa's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since Elias had known her, her confidence cracked. She collapsed back into the sofa, her mind racing. Then Elias leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "And while we are on the subject of truth, perhaps you should tell Victor about your work, about the reports you altered, the money you stole." Marissa's head jerked up, her eyes wide. What Victor frowned, confusion etched across his face. "What is he talking about?" Elias remained steady. "Your wife has been embezzling from her firm. I saw the documents. They have the evidence now. She has already been suspended. By the end of the week, she will face far more than embarrassment." Victor turned slowly toward Marissa, his expression a mix of shock and rage. "Is it true?" Marissa's hands trembled. I did what I had to. We needed money, Victor. The bills. The expenses, you said yourself. You lied to me." Victor interrupted, his voice cracking. "You risked everything. You let me think it was all under control while you were stealing." Marissa's eyes filled with tears, but her words fell flat. "I was doing it for us." Elias stood, his presence filling the room. "No, you did it for yourself. Just as Victor's cruelty was for himself. Neither of you ever thought of me as a man, as a father, as someone who had already given more than you could imagine. You saw me only as something to use, something to discard when convenient. Now you will live with the cost of that choice." The silence that followed was suffocating. Victor stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, while Marissa wept quietly into her hands. Elias looked at them both, his expression unreadable. At last he moved toward the door. "I will not be your prisoner anymore," he said calmly. "You will not take my pension. You will not send me to a care home. I built a life with my own hands, and I will end it on my terms, not yours." Victor lifted his head weakly. "Where will you go?" Elias paused, his hand on the doorframe. "Wherever I wish. I have more places to belong than you ever realized." His eyes hardened as he looked back at his son one final time. "Perhaps in losing me you will learn what it means to value someone before it is too late." With that, he stepped out into the rain. The cold drops stung his skin, but he felt lighter than he had in years. Behind him, the house stood heavy with shame and silence, its walls no longer a cage, but a reminder of betrayal left behind. Ahead, the street stretched wide, the harbor lights glowing in the distance, a future waiting for him to claim. For the first time in decades, Elias Kane walked freely, not as a burden, not as a forgotten man, but as himself, the father, the builder, the partner, the man who had endured. This story shows us a powerful truth. Respect is not measured in money, but in how we treat those who sacrificed for us. Elias gave his life to his son and daughter-in-law, but in their greed and arrogance they forgot the value of love, gratitude, and dignity. They mistook kindness for weakness and paid the price when the truth came to light. It reminds us that no matter how humble someone may seem, we should never underestimate them. Behind quiet lives often lie great strength, sacrifice, and stories we cannot imagine. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share it with your friends, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss more stories like this one.